Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I apologize for the delay. We've had some technical difficulties this morning with Facebook and Zoom, but we've got it sorted out now. So again, thank you so much for joining us. This is our second DEI panel, but our first topic focus, and I'm so excited about this particular topic. Whenever I announced that we were going to do topic focuses, I got a lot of interest and a lot of emphasis on the fact that we really needed to do one on disabilities in the SCA. There was an express about this being an overlooked topic, which is a valid point, that we have a lot of need in this area, and I'm ecstatic about the opportunity to talk about this with people across the known world and people from a variety of communities within this particular topic focus. And my name is Olivia. I'm from Atlantia, and I'm going to let the panelists introduce themselves. But first, I want to go over a few disclaimers and a couple of things about our panel today. We have someone who's doing closed captioning, and I need to remember to speak slowly. I'm already not doing very good at that, but that's a gentle reminder for my panelists as well, that we have accessibility accommodations that are being made. Someone is typing closed captioning for us, and so we're going to be speaking in a way that they're able to type closed captioning to help with that as well. Our panel disclaimer is that the views and opinions expressed by the panel participants are their current opinions and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or positions of the SCA Inc. And that's to say that this is an official panel. This is an official event of SCA Inc. No one that's here today has been asked to represent a community. No one's representing a subset of community. They're speaking on their personal life experiences. And I've let them know that throughout our conversations and planning. And it's a reminder for everyone else that even though you may resonate with some of the things that they're speaking about, and they may be part of the community that you're a member of, they're not being asked to represent you. And please feel free to let us know if you have any questions, comments, concerns, because even though we are in Zoom, the stream is being monitored by moderators, and they will be watching for questions that get posted, and we will be responding to those. It might not happen right away, but at the end of the discussion, we're going to go back and we're going to revisit the questions that get asked. So at this time, we're going to go over introductions, and I'm going to let each of the panelists introduce themselves, tell a little bit about themselves, and then we're going to move forward with the questions that we have that were pre-submitted and some of the questions that the panelists wanted to talk about and answer. And then we'll move forward with the questions that get submitted by our attendees. Okay, thank you again, everybody, for coming to visit and spend time with our panelists today. And thank you again to my panelists for being part of this with me. And let's move forward with our introductions.
Hello, I am Master Raven Mayne, and known in the Society of Creative Anachronism. I am a Laurel from the Kingdom of Atenveldt. I have been playing for over 2 decades now. In 2007, I was diagnosed with MS, multiple sclerosis. It started diminishing my abilities, but not my participation. So I had a lot to learn of how to change things and alter things so that I can continue to be in the SCA. In the last 10 years, I was Kingdom Arts and Sciences Minister of Atenveldt, and for 4 years, I was Society as Minister for Atenveldt. So I have inadvertently become a, not only because I'm up here, but because of my disability, become an example that no matter your disability, you can still do things in the SCA and still participate just like everybody else. That's it, I'm done.
Hello. Is it switching yet? Okay. I am Sadhbh. I am from Tiree, which is the mostly Canadian principality of Ontario. Hi, Thornwald. I have been in the SCA for on and off for the better part of 30 years. Professionally, I am trained and experienced as a long-term care nurse. So my specialty is in mobility issues as well as cognitive or mental health issues. Personally, my scoliosis allows me to participate on and off with various things. And I'll note COVID has definitely been setting off my neurodiversity and making things a little challenging. My main focus has always been empowerment. I don't believe in no, I believe in finding another way. So I'm here today and throughout my SCA experience to help everyone just find another way.
Thank you so much. Bambi, would you like to go next?
I am in the SCA Maria Beatriz La Mora. I've been in the SCA for 32 years, I think. Today's my daughter's birthday, so I think it's 32 years. I have progressed all the way from dancing holes in my feet and getting the chirurgeons to laugh at me every time I came back to get them bandaged again, to having finally been diagnosed with lupus, which I probably have had for 40 years. And also getting so much older that things break. So my experience of traveling through into a different body and having a neurodivergent child is all part of my being in the SCA to start with. I didn't know there was a whole lot different. And oh yes, I'm from the Kingdom of Atlantia, and I guess if anybody needs to know anything more about me, they can ask me. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Elisabeta?
Hey everybody, I'm Elisabeta Fischer. I'm from the Middle Kingdom, and I've been in the SCA for about 20 years. Started when I was 14. I became disabled at 12. So I've been varying levels of disabled throughout my SCA life. I have multiple disabilities that kind of stack on top of each other and create a bigger problem, so not like one targeted issue. Professionally, I'm a sign language interpreter, so I do a lot of work with the deaf community and the hard of hearing community. And in the SCA, I do a little of a lot of things, but I do a lot of teaching on accessibility and event planning, as well as disability history. And how I got here, I would say, is as my disabilities progressed and got worse, I still had all this passion for the SCA, but I was struggling to participate. And I had some breaking points and decided that I needed to help make changes or I wasn't going to be able to participate anymore. So that's why I started teaching and trying to make changes for the better.
Thank you so much. Judith?
Hi, I'm Lady Judith de Haye of the Middle Kingdom. I've been in the SCA since the early 90s. I was somewhat disabled when I started, but things have gotten more complicated with age and additional disabilities have piled up, kind of like Elizabeth has happened with Elisabeta. And I've had some wonderful experiences in the SCA. I've also had some rather negative experiences as a disabled person in the SCA. And my interest in being a part of this panel is to hopefully help people to understand that providing accessibility and accommodations is not that difficult or expensive, so that we can work together to find practical solutions. Thank you.
I'm Caterina de Paulo. I'm also from Atlantia. I guess Baroness Caterina de Paulo. I am a fighter and a scribe, and mostly a calligrapher, and a herald, and a service junkie, and a weaver, and I do a lot of stuff. It's a thing. It's not that I have a hard time focusing. It's just that there are so many really interesting things to do. I am the baby of the group, so I have been in the SCA for 5 years, a little over 5 years. So not a hugely long time. I'm a squire as well. I have fibromyalgia and I have generalized anxiety disorder and some major panic issues and complex PTSD, as well as osteoarthritis, and at least for another like 2 weeks, endometrial hyperplasia, which really affects my ability to participate without doing a lot of things that most men will never have to do. And most men, but and it's a problem, right? So I'm participating because it's important to me for different voices to be heard. Mundanely, my degree is in interpreting for ASL as well, although because of my fibromyalgia, I can't do that all the time, and I have strong opinions about accommodations for deaf and hard of hearing people. I think Elisabeta and I are on very much the same page where that's concerned. So overall, I'm really glad to be here and be talking to people. I try to find ways to let everyone participate, because my view of the SCA, and maybe it's because I'm new and maybe it's because I'm optimistic, I'm not very optimistic, is that everybody should have a chance to have fun, and everybody should have a chance to find ways to do things that make them happy. So that's why I'm here.
Thank you. So first, I want to talk about or go over a little bit how we talk about disabilities in the SCA in general. So let's go over some terminology with, as far as respecting people with language. How do we frame our language to be respectful? which terms are out of date or less appropriate than some other terms that we could use as far as referring to and talking about the community and people with disabilities in the SCA.
Okay, so I'm going to answer some of these questions. So first and foremost, I want people to understand that disabled is not a bad word. I get that question a lot. And disabled, disability, those words are 100% okay right now, and typically the preferred words. As far as being respectful to people and language, one of the conversations that's coming up a lot right now is people first language. And the difference is saying a person with a disability versus a disabled person. So they're just slight differences, but saying a person with a disability puts the person first, whereas a disabled person potentially that's setting their identity as disabled. A lot of people in the disabled community are leaning towards that one. I'm still not seeing 100% in any direction, and I don't know that we ever will, because people have their own personal preferences and what they feel comfortable with. So I would absolutely say, if you don't know, ask, but be kind about it. One of the most annoying things that someone can say is, well, what's wrong with you, right? It's not compassionate. It comes from a weird place, whether you mean it to or not. Usually they don't, but it still comes off weird. So just come from a place of passion. Say, how do you prefer to identify? It can be as simple as that. As far as outdated terms go, handicap is becoming outdated, and we are seeing the word accessible used more and more. So when we're talking about restrooms, we're talking about parking spaces. Handicap actually has some really negative things connected to the word, and people are trying to push it aside. Accessible makes it a much broader term and a much kinder term. And it really describes what we're aiming for when we're talking about these kind of spaces. So accessible, way better than handicap. Specifically with like the deaf and hard of hearing community, hearing impaired is way outdated, and to somebody who's culturally deaf can be really offensive, because you're looking at somebody and saying that they're impaired, there's something wrong with them, and they don't feel that way. So deaf, hard of hearing, these are totally good terms. So think about it like that. When you're talking to somebody, think about the words that you say and how it comes off. So if you talk to somebody and they say, yeah, I've got this and I've got that and I've got this, and if your response to that conversation is, geez, well, you know, I'd just die before I lived like that. You're probably not meaning it that way, but you're projecting that that person's life isn't as valuable because of the things that they have going on. And a kinder way to say is maybe, well, you've really got a lot going on. How can I make things more accessible for you so that you can participate too? Something like that. Just kind of think about how the words that you're actually saying really project to somebody, especially somebody that maybe hears that all the time, because those words can really weigh on somebody in the long run. So that's kind of what I wanted to touch on respectful language. Hopefully that answers some questions.
Thank you so much. I've heard it said that disabilities are not linear. Can we discuss this, please? How might disabilities change over time and differ from event to event? Does this also impact what kind of assistance might be needed to break down barriers to participation at an event? Bambi?
Sorry. I know questions on both sides are helpful in my experience. My lupus is not linear. It is terribly random. And so at some points, I could be having breathing problems. At other points, I could be having circulation and heart issues. It's terribly random. And sometimes I'm going to present healthier than other times. So it is, in my experience, because I have such a random disease, it's probably worse than normal. But besides that, the aging process also makes it where something breaks and that breaks down, and then another thing breaks down. And so every time someone sees me, it's entirely different. And somebody who is not inside my body could not possibly second guess what is now missing. um, Everybody, I believe, has something of that going on, where whatever their challenge is changes according to a lot of different things. And yes, so if you have had a limb amputated, that's going to stay amputated. But the challenges involved with getting around that is still different for every person. And that's what not linear means to me. Thank you.
For me, that I can speak for MS, an autoimmune disease. It's like Bambi said, it's random. So I don't know what kind of day I'm going to have until I wake up. And I could be fine in the morning, and then an hour later, or a minute later, I can't walk. Or right now, or most of the time, the conditions affect me. So if it's too warm, I get weaker. So if I'm going to an event and they say, you know, the air conditioning is out or something happened, I'm not probably going to have a great time at that event. So I usually have to, you know, figure out a way to cool myself off or whatever. But yeah, some of the disabilities are not linear. Even though we are raised to that we get hurt, we heal, and then we're fine again. With certain diseases like I have, that happens multiple times a day, and you have to roll with the punches and figure out how I'm going to get through the day or even the minute. That's what's good about having people ask you how you are, to be courteous. For us, it's how are you doing right now, because it could change. So always be cognitive of how we're feeling at the moment. And as Bambi said, you know, to keep in mind for running an event, having event stewards or people who want to put on events, to keep that in mind, to have things accessible for everybody. And for eventual aging of the SCA members, we're going to have those things thought about if you want to keep them able to attend SCA events. So also when the steward is or an event person is doing stuff, to keep in mind with that, you're going to need to have room for us to get around, or people to get around, and not have things too cramped up, like the tables and the chairs and stuff like that. So, but it'll benefit us all in the long term. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So, in order to help those outside of the disabled community understand the challenges of participating in the SCA as a person with disabilities, what are some specific things that you wish that they knew?
All right, for this one, part of my experience and some of what I've seen, not just in the SCA, but in modern life as well, is that I wish people would understand and accept that the person who is disabled, so disabled people, are actually experts in their body and their experience. They have to live in their body 24/7, and sometimes they even know better about what they need than the doctors. They also very much understand their own limitations. So I've seen it where sometimes a person trying to be helpful has tried to discourage someone from getting involved because they thought, well, you're disabled. You can't do that. Trust the person who says that they want to get involved. They know their limitations. You don't need to parent them. You don't need to limit them. Let them decide. And we don't have time limitations. If someone takes 5 years to learn something that maybe you learned in 5 months, great. They're still learning, they're still participating, and they're still having fun.
For me, I think what it's most important is that we are viewed as a person, not a person with a handicap, and to be treated like anybody else. We have limitations, we have things we can move around, but believe it or not, we have been thinking about how to get past those limitations and how to do things. So we can do a lot more. But I would like to also people to know that when it comes to events, we need to know a lot more information when we go, because it'll impact on how we get around and how we get to events and do things. We need to know that there's parking that we can get to and get out in and out of the car. We need to know what the land looks like at events, because if it's smooth or if it's rocky, all those things that normal everyday people will not notice or not make a difference, and they'll really not look down. The only thing usually they pay attention to is if it's too muddy, and that's going to affect people walking around. But that really affects somebody in a wheelchair. To get stuck in the mud is not fun. But just to have people keep in mind that we're going to need a way to get in and get out and get around. And I think that's pretty much it. Thank you.
So one thing that I think that normies, people without disabilities, don't sometimes understand is how much shame there can be when we ask for accommodations that are not something we've asked for before, or maybe something we won't ask for again because of that particular situation on that particular day. And so when we say something like, I need to sit down, or I need a leave, or I need my meds, or I need whatever it is that we need. If we were not dealing with disabilities, maybe we'd just be able to say that. I don't know. I've always had fibromyalgia. Like from the time I was a toddler, I've been officially diagnosed for 20 years. But make it easy on us. We don't want pity. We don't want you to feel bad for us because then we have to comfort you about our disabilities. And please understand, we don't have the energy for that. We're dealing with our disabilities, right? And but just accept that we're asking for something because we trust you enough to accept that you're probably not going to shame us for having this need, and you're not going to pity us for having this need, and we'll just get our needs met and then things will be better. And that means that we've trusted you with something that is coming from a very vulnerable place, because it is hard to admit that we can't do something because our bodies have failed us. Because a healthy person of our age and fitness levels should be able to do something that we just can't. And so it hurts us, and you just accepting, oh, okay, you need to do this thing. Well, let me help you do this thing. That's fine. Do you want me to sit with you and hang out for a while so you're not bored? Yeah, that eases things. It makes us feel so much more comfortable. And it's really one of those things that makes all the difference in knowing that we've not only been heard, but understood and are loved. And at the end of the day, the SCA is a social organization. And if the people around us hear us and love us and support us, why wouldn't we continue to come back? And most people with disabilities, in fact, every person with disabilities that I know, want very much to give back. So yeah.
Thank you for that. And I just want to go ahead and piggyback on that answer. We got a live question that I think is related to that. And so I think it's important to go ahead and ask it now. How would you handle someone saying, well, so-and-so has your same diagnosis and they can do X activity, so why can't you? And the particular person that asked this question said they get that a lot with their fibro diagnosis. And so I was hoping that Caterina / Puffin would be able to answer that question as well. I thought it was related to the previous one. So can you tell us a little bit more about how you would handle that situation and that question?
So first off, I'm sorry, because a lot of times people go, well, Caterina fights, why can't you fight? And I've heard that from people, and that's stupid. I'm working really hard to stay within our rules of not swearing, because I would have some very pointed conversation, but generally what I say is a person with disabilities is always unique. And no, even if we have the same diagnoses, the way that we deal with them is different, the way they affect us is different. You don't know what that other person has done to deal with their issues. You don't know how far along the path they are. I've done some weird things to handle my fibro to the point that I can be as functional as I am. And my support system is unlike most people's in that I have a household that supports me. Within the SCA, I'm squired to Duke Christoph and Duchess Adelheid, and they are amazing. My squire brothers are amazing. My husband, they call my emotional support Magnus. He's awesome. I have all kinds of people who are willing, friends, family. I have been embraced. Not everybody has that. So when somebody says, well, why can't you do what they're doing? Say, because I'm not them. And I have to deal with my diagnosis in my own way, because our bodies all react differently, especially with fibro. Fibro is different for everybody. And that's one of the reasons even doctors can't treat it consistently or well.
Thank you so much for that. So let's shift focus a bit and focus more on how individuals with disabilities prepare for an SCA activity. And so if everyone could briefly discuss what kind of planning and preparation that each of you do prior to attending an SCA event, because I know that every Scadian goes through some planning before an SCA event, but when you're planning with disabilities, there is some special planning involved that's above and beyond what others do that might not necessarily be considered and other people may not even be aware of. So let's go through briefly and everyone discuss what they do to prepare for an SCA event that other people may have no idea even happened. So Judith, would you mind beginning that discussion for us, please?
Well, for me, to be able to attend an SCA event, if it's out of state, I have to get within 30 days of traveling to a different state, I have to get a health certificate for my service dog. I need to plan ahead about things that I might need, not necessarily knowing whether I will or not. It can be anything from different harnesses for my service dog, or a cane, or a walker, or a wheelchair. And so a lot of times all of that stuff has to come too. Anybody with any kind of a medical condition probably needs to carry their medications. I have some unique medical issues that necessitate that if I am traveling a great distance from home, I have to locate a physician who would be capable of assisting me in an emergency. Same thing with making sure that I have determined a veterinarian in the event of something happening to my service dog. And all of that has to be packed well in advance in case I have a flare of my medical condition closer to the time that I would normally, everybody else might be throwing everything in their trailer. My trailer is already packed a couple of weeks ahead of time. Thank you.
So for me and my unique situation, I first look at the site. A lot of my struggles are going to be with terrain and how I get around a site. So if I go in there and I see that it's a campground, I'm automatically going to be thinking, okay, probably uneven ground, maybe not railings. Like your mind goes down a checklist, right? So I go, I see what type of site it is. Is it a school? Is it a campground? Is it a field in the middle of nowhere? We have those. And from there, I build my kit that is specific to that event. And I say kit because we understand the word kit, right? We have A&S kits that are specific to whatever craft we do. We have our fighting kit that's specific to the styles we like, right? For me, I have my mobility kit, and different terrains mean that I need to use different adaptive devices, different stability devices. You know, I might need to wear these pair of shoes instead of those pair of shoes, or I need my cane one day, but I need a different cane for a different scenario. So for me, a big deal is the site, how big it is, what kind of surfaces, are there stairs, are there ramps, those kind of things. That's what really dictates what all I have to bring with me. There are some things I always have to bring. I will always have my own chair with me. At minimum, I will always have at least one cane, if not two canes with me. So there's a bunch of stuff that just kind of like live in my car as an SCA person because I will always need them going to an event. And then I kind of customize the rest of it from there, depending on what information I have. Sometimes that information's on their website, which is awesome if it is. Sometimes you have to dig around a little bit.
Okay, for me, I end up taking a lot of things that I want to be able to do. So I do a little bit of fighting. I do a little bit of arts and sciences. Sometimes I really like to dress up into some fancy garb, but I have to accept that sometimes I'll wake up that morning of the event and go, nope. So I have to have the stuff that will be okay for me that day. So overpacking means bringing all the stuff I want to do and accepting that I may not get a chance to do those things. For me, especially dietary, I do have hypoglycemia, so I have to watch when I'm eating and what I'm eating, and I have some pretty interesting allergies. So feasting or group eating, I have to plan for the possibility that someone didn't read a label properly, or someone didn't write all the ingredients. Things like soy sauce actually has wheat in it usually. So I have to, if I don't know specifically, I have to decide, no, I'm not going to risk that. And so I will bring enough, I'll often bring enough food or nourishment to get me through the weekend, which usually is like my vegan shakes, because then I know I'm not getting anything that I'm allergic to. So that's my kind of over prepping.
As I was thinking about all the stuff that I usually have to prepare for to go to any event, I just realized I need to prepare if for some bizarre reason I was stranded in the middle of nowhere. I would have to have certain things with me to survive. And because of my disease, I have to keep my temperature at a certain level. So I have to have a cooler with ice packs. If I fall or if something happens to my clothes, I have to bring an extra set of clothes with me just in case. Food, snacks, all my medications, umbrella. You pretty much have to be like some people said that the SCA is kind of like, and that is be prepared, for anything. When it comes to sites, my main concern is getting to a site, not only the weather and what it's like inside an event, but how close parking is to where we need to go. Sometimes that's my one of the first obstacles when I get to a site is to try to figure out how far it's going to be. And in Arizona, where it gets super hot, distance is a major issue for me. Just trying to get from one end to the other. I have learned through mistakes that when I need a scooter, to make sure that we have an extra key and my battery charger with me, because if I get to a place with a scooter and I don't have those things, I have a very heavy wheelchair that can't be pushed. So it's impossible. So those are all the things that I have a checklist to make sure before I leave the house. But one of the things I do make sure I do before I go to an event is I try and contact the event steward. Introduce myself if they don't know who I am, and just let them know I'm coming. I don't expect anything, but I just give them a heads up so I'm not a surprise when I show up at an event. A bad surprise. Thank you.
I probably always over-prepared even before I realized I had to prepare a bit more. I do bring extra clothes all the time. I end up loaning a lot, but I do bring extra clothes all the time because I could get to the site and realize that because of an asthma attack or something else, that all of a sudden my rib cage is not cooperating and I can't get into a certain thing because they're distended because I'm breathing funny. I also have some food allergies, and to things that are very, very prevalent to everybody else. No, it's not wheat, but so a lot of times I bring, actually all the time, I bring a cooler full of food, enough to share, because I don't want to have to eat it alone. And most of the time, it used to be feasts had off-board and on-board, and the off-board one, you would still have company with other people who had brought their own food. That is, I guess, due to the places we have been renting, not the case anymore in Atlantia. You don't see that much anymore. I also bring my mobility devices because I never know how much I'm going to need them or to what extent I'm going to need them. So yes, I have brought my mobility scooter with me to a week-long event, and I didn't need it. Hooray. And my walker was enough, and my walker and my service dog were plenty at that event. But you never know. So most things live in my car, my scooter and my walker and my cane with a seat on it, because I never know. Extra clothes always. And yes, I do travel as if I might get stranded. I have a 5-gallon water tank in my car. I have food for both me and the dog. And I even have a hand crank blender to cut up ice for ice shavings for ice packs. Thank you.
I can confirm that I have seen Bambi packed for a weekend event, and it took my entire station wagon to fit all her stuff in for the weekend. And she didn't use about 3/4 of it, but I didn't mind because, one, it was pretty local, and two, if it made her feel comfortable, I was happy with it. So for me, my event packing is, or my event prep is basically everything that you would expect from a regular event prep, except one, I have a rule that I do not go to any event where I cannot add something to the event that is not just for me. And that's just my own rule for me because I like to participate. So I've either done a scroll beforehand, which is one of the reasons I'm a scribe, or I am planning to herald, or I have, I've acted as reservationist. I do things as an event prep that I can have done before I get there, so that when I'm at an event, I feel like I've already contributed and I've put in the effort for that already. And then just my usual stuff for an event. And then depending on who's going to be there, if my household is there, I don't have any worries because if something comes up, they're there for me. If my household won't be there, I have friends that I know are on tap. If I have, if my husband's with me, again, I know I have people. So for me, prepping for an event looks a lot like making sure I have people to handle contingency plans if I am incapacitated in some way, which occasionally happens. And occasionally I need to self-medicate with a lot of tequila. So if you see me drinking a big glass of water and sitting there looking pained, don't ask me if I need more water because that's not water. So that's how I prepare.
Thank you all for providing that insight. I think that a lot of people aren't necessarily aware of the extra planning that goes into preparing for an SCA event whenever you're having to make your own accommodations for disabilities. And I think that really helped a lot of people who've been watching this panel. So I really appreciate you sharing each of your experiences with us. We received a live question that went along with one of our pre-submitted questions. So I'm going to read the live question and then the pre-submitted question, and I believe the answer is going to be the same. So the live question was, my wife has low vision, i.e. tunnel vision. What type of accommodations should we expect? And then also there was a pre-submitted, I suffer from short-sightedness and therefore have to wear glasses all the time. What is being done to allow people to incorporate this condition into their characters? So what I'd like to do is we'll answer the pre-submitted question, and if the person that submitted the live question has a follow-up, then I'll ask them to submit their follow-up question, and hopefully we can provide more clarity if we need to do so, if that makes sense. So if we could, Angela, Sadhbh, I'll go ahead and let you answer the question that you prepared for, and if anyone has a follow-up question to their live submission, then that's how we'll handle that, if that's okay.
Hi, thank you. First off, as a nurse, I'm going to ask you to please wear your glasses or whatever it takes to help your vision, because I don't wish to practice my first aid as you trip on the roadway. Part of our enjoyment of the SCA is being able to see the pretty garb and the nice scrolls at court, and also seeing the detail of that little smush of color over there where the slacky sounds are coming from. That's part of our fun, part of our enjoyment. So I'm going to ask you to please wear what you need to be able to see that. Event coordinators, it's been said before, perhaps allowing for a little more space in aisleways or between tables and such, so that people aren't tripping. This is one of my mobility focuses, where I look down and see where people's feet are going to be, because some people can't look down. All right. When it comes to glasses, well, actually glasses are period. Throughout the Italian Renaissance era, it was actually quite common, relatively common, to wear these magnifying glasses on your face. And I've always been told in the SCA that the creative part of Society for Creative Anachronism is for us to imagine anything that is more modern to be something less modern. That's our imagination. So if glasses were being used in the Italian Ren time, it seems to me, and I've seen some references, haven't looked too deeply into it, where glasses or regularly used magnifying glasses for our faces was likely invented something in around the 13th century. So glasses are period. We use a lot, we ignore when chairs aren't exactly period. We just knew that they had chairs, so we just pretend. We certainly use sunscreen nowadays, because we don't like dying of cancer and stuff. And besides, the sunburn hurts. So glasses, absolutely, wear them. They are period. And your particular rendition of these on your face, to me, is pretty much the same as our polyblend fabrics, our machine straight seams. It's just something we accept as part of that creative anachronism. So please wear them.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. I think that's really important. I've seen comments where people have said, oh, glasses are not period. Glasses are period. And one of the comments that I saw come up was that someone picked round frames because they look less modern. And if you choose to integrate that type of style choice, because it helps you in the SCA, you can, but it's not necessary. And if someone tells you that glasses are not period, I guarantee you that I can help point you in the direction of someone, or I can help correct the person who says that glasses are not period. And I can probably tag Puffin in as one of the people that will correct someone who says that glasses are not period. Private message me and we will help find you someone who can have that conversation, or I can have that conversation. Glasses are period, and it's as important as anything else that you need. It's an accommodation that you have to make for yourself to make sure that you're safe. And it's just, you can say medicine is not period. You still have to take your medicine. It's as simple as that. So let's move on from there. What advice do you have for people with disabilities on how to self-advocate for accommodations they need to participate in the SCA? So I'd like to tag in Bambi to begin this question. Please.
Communication is totally the key. Both people should ask. People should ask about, like, before they get to the event, they should get in touch with the autocrat about their interests and find out who is doing something with their interest at the event, and then get in touch with them to find out a way to cog into it. Sometimes, a lot of times, you're going to hear, oh, thank heavens, somebody called with an interest in my particular interest, and now I have somebody to share it with, or I have, would you mind very much volunteering to be a part of this? And other times, the event people need to ask people who've said, I don't know what to do, and invite them in. An invitation is always welcome, even if you have to say no for some reason. The first time somebody invited me into a kitchen was heaven. I did not realize that even with my walker, I could fit in a corner and chop vegetables and be a part of the kitchen, which I adore. It made me so very happy. I didn't realize, I'd been in for so long, I did not realize I could ask a cook who I didn't know if I could come join and help them in the kitchen. And now it's something I constantly do. And I have done feasts of my own and invited people to come into the kitchen. And I never say no to somebody who wants to help, who asks to join in. But it can be anything. It could be somebody running an A&S display. It could be the keeper of the lists. It could be a water station, where it could be anything. But if you have an interest, let people know you have that interest, because someone will share that interest and will be thrilled that you do. Thank you.
For me, my advice is to get to know who your local seneschal is, who your local exchequer are, who your local baron and baroness are, and get to know them. If you can, if it's possible, go to their business meetings if they're open. Become a common sight with the people around you, especially in your local group. For those who are not in the SCA, the baronies like to, and shires, and even kingdoms, but like to claim you as one of their own. So if you let everybody in your local area know who you are and answer all those questions locally to those that are closest to you in your area, the less answers you have to give people, because most of the people around you will know those answers. They'll maybe, hopefully they'll have, those people that you get in touch with will have you in mind when they're looking at a site or when they get to a site. I've had people call me and say, oh, by the way, it's going to be hard for you to get on this part of the, the site or what, or part of the event or get into this area. So, so yeah, I think like we had mentioned before, communication is the main thing, is to talk to as many people as possible and get those answers to those questions that you're inevitably going to be asked by people who don't know you. But if you have, like I said, a bunch of people around you who have those answers, it's going to be a lot easier and you'll have a lot better time. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So when in-person events are happening, what is your greatest barrier to full participation in the SCA? Judith?
Hello. I would have to say that the biggest barrier to participation in the SCA I've encountered has been people's attitudes. I realize that discussing this kind of thing can be challenging, but I also feel that that's why we need to have the conversation. For a person with disabilities to be told after requesting an accommodation that if they can't manage on their own, they should just go home. To be told that you aren't allowed to camp with the people you came with because only disabled people are allowed to camp in the segregated camping area that was set aside for people with disabilities. To go to attempt to go to a court or a performance or class and not be able to get in a wheelchair, so that you end up out in the back where you can't see anything because everybody back there is standing, are very difficult for the person that's experiencing them. And it makes you want to not come back. But then there's a good part that makes you want to come back, so you keep trying again. And as I started out with, I think it's important that we be honest about what is actually happening, so that the people that can help to make things better. I understand it's not any different than for other marginalized groups that are being excluded, but it's kind of unique for people with disabilities. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So I want to shift forward a little bit. Many people want to know how they can better prepare and plan events for those with disabilities in the SCA. And let's go over some experiences and insight that the panel can provide that may be useful in this context. And this, I believe, is one of our live questions, and it fit into this section, so I moved it here. What can an event steward do to try to anticipate needs? And the submitter said, I have actually been chastised because an event location we were able to obtain didn't have an elevator right beside the entrance, although there was one as well as a ramp, both making both levels accessible. And Elisabeta, would you mind speaking to this question for me, please?
So reading it, I'm not 100% clear on if the elevator that you had and the ramp that you had, just maybe people couldn't find it or maybe couldn't use it. That's where I'm not 100% clear on the question. But what I can say for event stewards is that this is definitely one of those things to try to anticipate. As you've said, try to anticipate needs. If you have a multi-level event, absolutely should be looking at, do we have an elevator? Where is the elevator located? Is it close to activities that we have going on? Do people need to get to another level just to get in the door? These are things that an event steward should be looking at. And if those questions cannot be answered as a yes, then your site's not accessible. And I would highly recommend looking for a different site. Because if you have a site that only has stairs, you are cutting off a chunk of people right off the bat. If your site does have an elevator, but maybe people don't know where it is, this is where signage comes in handy. Start making signs, slapping them up, arrows this way, arrows that way, highlighter, highlight it, whatever you got to do. Just make them clear, readable, in common places where people can see them so that they can get to the things that will help them get between the levels. Also, if you could think about it ahead enough in time, you can put that in your program books. You can put a sign up on your gate table. There's a lot of things that the event steward can do to ease that problem so that your people attending don't have to search for the info once they're there. It's just right there, no questions asked, got it right in front of me.
Thank you for that. I'm going to pause for a moment to let our closed captioning, our accommodations catch up, and give a gentle reminder to our panelists that we have to give her a moment to type, and thank Fiona for joining us and providing this accommodation, because I think it's very important and wonderful. And I'm sad that I wasn't able to reach out to her for the first panel, but it's a goal of mine to be able to provide this accommodation in the future. So thank you, Fiona, for being with us today. And I'm sorry if we've been speaking too quickly for you before, but let's move forward and see if I can get caught up here. I've heard it discussed that sometimes event trade-offs occur in the disabled community, especially in the context of a lack of preparation from a planning perspective. Can anyone on the panel tell me a little bit more about this, or perhaps an example that they've experienced in the SCA?
So mobility is a big deal. If you have ANS in one place and it's all accessible, and you have other ANS on the other side of the site, maybe that's Bardic, right? And that's accessible too, but maybe the person that wants to do both can't get from one to the other. Then they have to choose which they can do. If we don't have accommodations, and this is skipping ahead a little bit, and we'll talk about it soon, but if we don't have accommodations for deaf and hard of hearing people at court, why would they go to court? To sit there so they can't understand anything? That doesn't make any sense either. So they might go, but they're feeling excluded, lesser, other. that's not okay either. So, and then depending on disability, like me personally, I make a trade-off. If I fight that day, you're probably not going to see me doing 700 other things that I would like to do, because that's the thing that I have the physical ability to do. And or maybe it's hard for me in cabins when I get there a little late and all that's left are top bunks and I have to climb up to the top bunk, and it's by that time like I'm literally walking on knives. It hurts so much. So we trade things off in time, we trade things off in pain, we trade things off in the ability to get where we need to go in time to get there and participate, or to be seen and to be able to participate as just a regular member. Olivia, you mentioned interpreting last minute. I think that would probably be better to be added in the other thing. I have interpreted last minute for someone that I did not know was deaf. And his wife and I met, and I'm not entirely certain, to be honest, I'm not entirely certain how they found out that I interpret, but I was happy to do that. But I think that there are better ways to accommodate our and include our deaf and hard of hearing community. And I think Elisabeta and I are probably going to talk about that later.
Thank you. So, how can the SCA offer better accommodations for the deaf and hard of hearing community for court specifically? What are better ways to accommodate people at court without othering them?
So, two-part question. We'll start with the first part. Accommodations, better accommodations for deaf and hard of hearing people at court specifically. That's what they asked for. We have silent heralds. Again, this is my personal opinion, so take it at that. I think silent heralds are great. I love that people want to help in any way that they can. As a professional interpreter, we talk about being a helper versus being a professional. And that's where, as a professional, I get kind of torn on the subject. I think I love the idea of silent heralds. I'd love to see more training. I'd love to see more experience and have almost like a standard, if we could, before we kind of throw them in court, because we have a lot of really specialized language and it's terrifying to be standing in front of a crowd and suddenly you're like, what do my hands do? I forgot, you know? And that can get a professional choked up, let alone somebody who hasn't gotten a chance to really get trained in that. So I would love to see more training before we kind of throw people into it. In a perfect happy world, I would also love to see us start to utilize things like these voice to text programs. Some people are hard of hearing, don't know any sign. Some people are deaf and don't know any sign. There are some really good voice to text programs out there. The problem is we would have to add microphones and maybe tablets, things like that, to our courts. And I don't know if we're there yet because that changes the ambiance. But from an accommodation standpoint, I think it could really benefit. And I have heard some rumors that some groups are trying to kind of test those out and see if they work in a court kind of setting. As far as accommodating without othering, I'm a big fan of discretion. I like to keep like a private sign up area, like at gate, something like that, where people can just be like, oh yeah, I'm just gonna kind of casually write my name on this right here, and suddenly you've got a reserved chair at court. But it's not like, hey, yeah, you come here, yeah, you that needed the accommodations, come on, yeah, no, you don't want to like call people out, right? So keeping it discreet. Some people don't feel comfortable, some people do, some people don't care, you know. So discretion is great, and that's kind of where I stand on that. I don't know if that hopefully that answers the question.
I think that helped a lot. So let's talk more about, where did it go? Okay. Let's talk more about what accommodations can be made for the deaf and hard of hearing community for events in general.
So I am a personal believer in inclusion, very hard, and I find that it's very difficult for deaf and hard of hearing people who do sign almost exclusively to feel included. Our game is social, our events are social. What would it be like if you put earplugs in at the beginning of an event and then went through your entire event with no way to communicate to people? Not all deaf and hard of hearing people speak well or speak at all. ASL is their primary and sometimes only language. I wish, like in my heart, I wish that we could hire interpreters for our deaf and hard of hearing community that need that, because it's not just about court. How many events would you go to if court were the only thing you could understand? You could watch the fighting alone. You could do your art alone. You could work in the kitchen alone. How do you feel like part of the community? So there's a balance. Not everything has to be interpreted, and there are a lot of ways to have people feel like part of the community. But honestly, especially for our deaf and hard of hearing members, having an interpreter is key to showing them they're welcome. And maybe it starts at the local level, and maybe your home group starts to learn to sign. That'd be delightful. Maybe your shire or your canton or your barony all sign enough that they can welcome you and tell you more or less what's going on and be inclusive that way. If everybody signed ASL, then we really wouldn't need interpreters, would we? And that would be delightful, and that's never going to happen. But if you're part of a smaller group, make sure that you know how to communicate with the people that are part of your community and that they know how to communicate with you. So if you know someone who's deaf or hard of hearing, make the effort, reach out. Hey, how's it going? You know, or make sure if you know they're hard of hearing and read lips, make sure you face them. Make sure you're including them in as much as you can, even if there aren't heralds for everything, or aren't silent heralds for everything, rather.
What are the biggest challenges with common site rules and how they impact people with disabilities?
Okay, so one of the biggest challenges that I have seen is when you reach out for information and the answer you get back is the site's ADA compliant, and that's it. That's all the information you get. So I want people to understand that a huge challenge we face is the idea of ADA compliant versus actually accessible. because accessible looks really different to different people depending on what they've got going on. And the ADA is just kind of a short, brief framework, and there are so many ways around it. And I promise you that places will do everything they can to go around it instead of fixing problems. So a huge challenge is having access to the right information. Another thing that I wanted to mention is reframing your perspective on your layout. So I see this a lot, especially in like the fighting area. I hate to call fighters out. I love y'all, I do, I promise. But when you have like the door that doesn't have any stairs and that's really wide, and they put the fighting in that room, like that's the fighting entrance, right? Because you've got totes to come in, you've got gear to bring in, but then all that stuff kind of like there's nowhere to get through all of that, because then that's now fighter space, right? So do we have another door that's like that? Do we have another double door that's nice and wide, that's flat, that doesn't have a bump for people to get through, that doesn't have stairs leading up to it? These are the kind of things that I wanted people to really think about when they start planning their events. Think about your layout, think about it from a different perspective. I get why we do that for the fighters, because they got to get all their gear in. But also, let's think about somebody who maybe can't physically get through that door unless they have a door that size. So those kind of things I would definitely ask people to rethink their perspective, because that's huge challenges that I have seen in a lot of sites.
Thank you so much. What are generally reasonable accommodations that event stewards can easily implement in most sites to make events more welcoming and easier to attend?
Yes. I think that it's important to first understand that accommodations are not accessibility. Accommodations is something that you need to do because the event site is, or the event is not accessible. So if you first address accessibility, then you will have less requests for accommodations. The definition of reasonable would be that it would not pose an undue burden to the event, whether that's financial or time, or you're not going to, nobody's going to expect you to go and buy a bunch of plywood and build a ramp. But if it's readily achievable and you have a request for an accommodation, then there should be no reason why you can't provide it. For instance, if an event has a rule that everyone must unload their vehicles within 30 minutes and get their vehicles moved to parking, and a person with a disability asks for a little bit more time to get their vehicle unloaded, you should grant that request. It's not posing any undue hardship to allow that person an extra 15 or 20 minutes. And if you're in that big of a hurry to have their vehicle unloaded and moved, why are you letting able people take more time? It's those kinds of trade-offs that need to happen. And again, if you make the event, do what you can in advance, make it part of your plan to provide accessibility, there won't be a burden for providing accommodations because they're going to be few and far between. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So I know everyone can speak on this, but I'm going to ask Raven to answer if he's willing. What is something that would make all the difference if it was changed, included, or excluded as far as participation in the SCA?
Well, the one thing I was thinking of when I was considering about sites is the bathroom is really important. A lot of people take it for granted that there is a bathroom, but for us, if we can't get in a bathroom, that it's not going to do us any good. Also, majority of the time, no matter where you go, and we notice it more than most, is that someone will use the accessible bathroom because it's bigger, and they can change in it and other things. And we don't have a choice. Most of us don't have a choice. We can't go into the regular restroom. So most of the times we are sitting outside waiting for you to get out. So it'd be nice just to be able to have that on a forethought for people to try not to use the accessible bathrooms that we need. And just make sure it's just a consideration and people have that in the forethought of their mind. I think that's it.
Thank you. So I know many people have asked about how they can support those with disabilities in the SCA above and beyond event planning. Let's go into more detail about how these goals can be achieved. How can the SCA support people with disabilities who seek paths to peerage? What are some of the hurdles that they face, that we as the community, as people with disabilities face?
So this is such a unique question for each path that it's really difficult to say, this is one thing that we could do for all paths to all peerages, right? But I would say we need to, that part's been done. What we need to do is focus on that person, figure out what their specific needs are, and then learn what is reasonable to expect from them and what is not reasonable to expect from them. For example, I have a friend who is autistic. He is very autistic, however he wants to define that. He says that he's very autistic. That's how he defines it. That's what he says. He needs clear direction. He needs, when he does something that you don't like, he needs you to say, I didn't like that. This is what I prefer. You need to not do it this way. That's what he needs. If we're going to look at him as a member of the peerage, we have to take into account his neurodiversity and what he does. We cannot expect people to cover whatever their neurodiversity, whatever their disabilities are, to appear normal to some vague standard of normalcy, so that we just long enough that we can go, oh, well, they're normal enough. They're good enough at passing. No, we need to understand, we need to accept, and we need to make allowances for that. If they are treating people with courtesy, when they understand what courtesy is, then how is that not peer-like? These are the things we need to consider. If somebody is a fighter, I'm a squire, right? I don't need somebody to go, well, she's a good enough fighter for somebody with fibro. I don't need that. But if I am having the worst fibro day I've had in a while and my right side is dead, what I don't need is somebody going, well, she missed this big tournament. So, I mean, is she really serious? Maybe I missed the big tournament by marshalling, or maybe I did 4 scrolls for court that day, or maybe I was the court herald. literally couldn't pick up a sword because the left side of my body was dead, or I couldn't hold the grip. So understand that each of those accommodations needs to be different for the person, and accept that, and really look at what they're contributing and what they're doing along their path without expecting them to be normal or healthy.
For me, it was getting people to recognize the person, and not to do something that we can't do, and that is ignore the disability. To be valued as a person, as an individual, who can do a lot of things, and is, just because they're impaired doesn't mean they can't participate on any level. It's a lot about education and communication with peers. There are already peers to understand where you as an individual, or where a person as an individual is going or wants to go. And like anybody else, they'll need help getting there. But it's very important to understand that, you know, everybody who's maybe shooting to hopefully someday be elevated to a peerage, anybody has hurdles in front of them. Those with disabilities, or have to just be concerned they just have another hurdle to overcome. It's a big one, but it can be overcome. You can do things. I think also trying to do things to build confidence in them, in people, in yourself, to not hold yourself back, to be the first person to do that, and show people that you can do things, and to volunteer for things, and to challenge yourself, I think, is another thing. Even though every day is a challenge, and sometimes for us, some of us, every minute is, it's good to challenge yourself and to put yourself out there and let people know where you want to go, and they don't necessarily have to help you if they don't want to, but just let them know where you're going and where you're headed. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Does the surprise nature of courts and awards ever present a challenge for individuals with disabilities in the SCA? What could be done to assist with this?
Yes. There are a lot of people who are very anxious or very shy or incredibly uncomfortable with surprises or in front of crowds. So anything that can be done, like small courts, or I've seen some monarchs who are just wonderful. They gather their friends of the person and they go to the person's camp. I've seen them go find them off to the side of court to give them awards. And it's I did one. There's someone in our kingdom called Kinnisworth the Quiet, and she's very reserved and she likes to be quiet. And we had the quietest court ever. And I think I spoke this loudly as the herald, and nobody, we were literally in view of the entire court, but off to the side before court began, and nobody knew we had court because she got an undine for her work. And we can do things like that. We could express preferences and accommodate. If people know that's our preference, that should make it through to the award recommendation system, I would hope. And anything that we can do to either not surprise people who can't deal with surprises, or to hold quiet courts, really helps. And it's such a kindness that it is only a benefit to everyone involved.
Thank you. So I know we've gone, or we're about to go over time. We had some technical difficulties in the beginning that caused us to get a bit of a late start. Our closed captioning interpreter did have to go because of our late start. And I apologize for anyone who was depending on that interpretation, but I hope to have that added to our recording so that people who need that whenever they're reviewing the recording later has access to it. And in the future, I plan to do my best to try to make that accommodation available. So let's move forward, considering the fact and acknowledging that we are going over time, and I apologize. For people with disabilities, people with post-traumatic stress disorder specifically, both military and non-military, suffer from various symptoms. The submitter said, for me personally, it's loud and sudden noises, crowded halls, and those are the biggest enemies, as they like to call it. What can be done to make these people at ease and able to enjoy events as much as everyone else?
So there's a few things that the event stewards can kind of plan ahead for here. One of them would be to take into account your site layout again. If you're outdoors, it's probably considerably less of an issue from a perspective of loud noises, because that kind of diffuses into the space a little bit better, but might still be a problem depending on how closed in you guys are, like how close everything is. So I would say looking at, where your fighting is, if you're indoors, again, I'm going to talk about indoors. If you're indoors and you have your fighting in like a hall, it's probably going to echo really loud. So having community space that's outside of that area, having quiet rooms, having other activities just away from that noise is really going to be beneficial for all, to be honest, because our fighting is kind of noisy, right? And it's hard to have chat or whatever. So again, thinking about the layout, quiet rooms, which I think we skipped a question and somebody's going to discuss, so I'm not going to go into that. And common areas that have like enough space so that you're not right up against another activity. So you have like a little bit of a buffer. Those are all things that can help. Another thing for that helps with like crowds, right? Like sometimes people make me claustrophobic, and like I totally get that's a thing. So having open spaces, a little bit of a buffer, so I don't feel like I'm like squeezed up on top of somebody. That's gonna benefit everybody for real. One of the things we see at Penzic specifically that I think is really cool and totally related here is the cannon alert system that somebody started at Penzic. Before and after every battle at Penzic, these cannons go off, and especially for the camps that are really near them, those cannons are loud. Like I can hear them and I'm halfway across site, right? So especially if you're in a camp nearby, but if you have PTSD, I mean, it doesn't really matter where you are, right? If you hear that sound, that might trigger something in you. Penzic has implemented this cannon alert system that you can sign up for, and basically somebody has inputted everybody's phone number into their phone as like a group text, and they stand next to the cannons, and when they get ready to go, they text everybody. And then, it's not a perfect system, right? Because there can be delays, but it's a step in the right direction, which is what we want to see, right? It's a start. I don't know if any other events have things like cannons. I haven't been to any other wars, so I think maybe that's Penzic specific, but it's definitely something we could learn from, right? If we're going to have some loud noises, having a herald announce it, maybe say, oh yay, about to have some loud noise in here, I think we've got a little wiggle room to learn there.
Thank you so much. So let's stay on the topic of neurodivergence. which can be arguably along the lines of PTSD. Some people who have post-traumatic stress disorder identify as neurodivergent as well. So what changes have you seen in your respective kingdoms being made to make events more accessible for neurodivergent members?
Okay. I have seen some events have quiet rooms or quiet pavilions where it's low stimulus, and the idea is that you can step in there and just let it go. Neurodivergent people often tend to need to destimulate. The activity and everything else, as positive and wonderful as it is, can be a little much. Okay. Also children. I've also seen some courts do a live stream where the recording devices have been hidden within standards, things that look like standards. So, and then people can stream it on their own devices. So they can maybe be in that quiet space or not be in the thick of court and still actually see what's going on. Going back to the idea of surprise courts, as neurodivergent, I don't do well with surprise courts. Giving me even 10 minutes heads up that I'm going to be called into court, I don't need to know what it is precisely. I just need to know so I can get my brain reset to be allowed that. Apparently I was called for 12th night, which is a big coronation event in Ontario, to receive my Gute de Song, which is a grant of arms for service in Ontario. And I'm actually really glad I wasn't there. That was too many people, just too much. So they spoke all these lovely words of me, which I got to find out later, which was amazing. But if I'd been there and called in, I would have heard none of it. I would have been there and I would have been walking away with this paper in my hand going, oh, what just happened? I have no idea. Instead, my Baron and Baroness, knowing me and being respectful of me, took that, brought it to me, and during a court where I was already up in court, because I was event steward at the time, they just didn't let me leave, so I didn't get out of that headspace. And that's when they presented it to me. And I felt so accepted, included, respected. It was a big change for me, and I really loved it. So surprise court summons, I've seen some kingdoms apparently take into account where if they know ahead, they can send out a little word or send somebody to go say, you have been summoned to court when we have court. Just give a little time for the headspace to change, or give them a chance to say, you know what, no. I think this would also help with other disabilities, mobility, if someone's having a bad pain day and they just can't make it to court or something. Court summons can help a lot.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, 20 years ago, more than that. I think it was more like 25 years ago. I remember a lot of large indoor events had large rooms set aside for changing rooms. There was a women's and then there was a men's changing room. And I didn't realize it at the time that I was suffering from PTSD. All I knew was I could get to an event, and that might have been all I could do. People were bringing me to events, and I was using the dressing room as a quiet room. I would sit in there, I would do people's hair, I would lace them up. I might make it out to dinner. But that was my quiet room, and that literally saved my life in the SCA. Now that they're actually doing quiet spaces, and the term The term neurodivergent wasn't even used back then. I had no idea. But I did appreciate the ability to be able to do that. And eventually I got somewhat better and could actually, again, participate in the other things I loved. But I love the fact that the word neurodivergent exists. I love the fact that it is changing and that actual quiet rooms and spaces away and people are addressing those needs. That makes me so happy that they're going in that direction. And keep going, just keep going, because finding a dressing room and combing everybody's hair all day, could be spent better. Thank you.
Thank you, Bambi. So I'm wondering, and someone submitted this question, have you seen a greater recognition / acceptance of service dogs? Judith, can you speak to this?
Certainly, thank you. We're seeing a better recognition of service animals and the many things that they can do for people with disabilities, both in and out of the SCA. People are starting to understand that they should not pet a service dog when it's working, or feed it, or even talk to it because it can distract them from their job. People are, and businesses are learning to recognize the difference between a real legitimate service dog and a dog that may be being impersonated as a pet that's being impersonated as a service animal, which is a big problem everywhere. But it's also important to understand that it may not be a fake service dog. It may be a person who is legitimately disabled with a brand new green service dog who is being exposed to SCA sounds and distractions for the first time. And so we can't just say, just because we saw an animal that wasn't behaving as well as that seasoned service dog you've seen for the last 8 years, that it's a fake. It has to be based on the animal's behavior. If the animal is out of control and the owner can't regain control, then, or the animal is behaving aggressively toward people or other service animals, you absolutely have the right to ask that owner to remove that animal from the site. It's my understanding, I believe Jessica Van Hatten announced this at her recent class that she was doing for DEI, that the BOD has approved a new service animal policy for the SCA that's going to be society-wide. And I don't know all the particulars, but that policy was developed because there were some issues with some of the things that some events were doing, such as requiring people who use service dogs to submit a special pre-registration for their service dog and produce documents that can't be required, or check in separately with a member of staff before they were allowed to troll in and enter the site. And those got into a kind of iffy situation. So I'm looking forward to seeing what this new policy has to offer. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So that's closing up our pre-submitted questions, with the exception of some that were submitted and fit along the lines of what we already planned to talk about. So what we're going to do now is a bit of a topic focus, And what I'd like to do is take a moment and go around the room and have each of our panelists speak and go over what people have done in the SCA to positively impact your participation by accommodating your disabilities. And with all of that in mind, let's discuss what can be done moving forward to increase inclusivity in the SCA. So we're going to be as brief as possible with this. And then we have some live questions that have been submitted during our panel that we're going to go over. But let's talk about what people have done to positively impact your experience and some suggestions that you have that could be done moving forward to make things better for you and for the community, the disabled community. And then we'll get into our live questions. And I know we're over time. We started late and we're over time. But let's go around the room. And Judith, I'll ask you to start, if you don't mind.
Thank you. I've had some wonderful experiences in the SCA, and it has mostly been people who were kind. Even if you can't provide the accommodations or the accessible features that someone needs, simply being kind goes a long way. And I encourage everyone who is planning events or volunteering to serve as staff on events, stop and think about being kind. You know, somebody driving a golf cart at Penzic, realizing that I looked exhausted, stopped and offered me a ride to where I was going. And that was before Penzic offered golf cart transportation for people with disabilities. It was just somebody that had authorization to be using that golf cart. Things like that can really make a huge difference in whether that person is able to do anything tomorrow. Because if they had to walk all that way that they were headed, they would have barely made it back to camp. Thank you.
I'm going to say something kind of similar. I've had a lot of positivity. I've also had a lot of negativity. I remember being at a big reoccurring event and the accessibility was lacking. And when I approached the staff and offered to assist in future events, I was told no, because it would just be easier if people like you didn't show up. So when you hear things like that, it makes you wonder why you come, right? So the fact that now we're starting to have some of these conversations more openly, and I'm seeing people listening, I'm seeing little changes making, it really makes you feel like there's a validation that you're worth including. And so I really hope to see more of that, because I'm seeing little tiny tidbits of it, right? I just want to see it spread everywhere. And also I want people to understand that by listening and including people, you're empowering them, right? You're asking, what do you need to be included and to be welcome? And that's empowering. That gives them the opportunity to step up and really take some control. And yeah, I think that's really great. And I hope we continue in this direction, because I'm seeing it.
So for me, mostly it's been awareness. People have become a little more aware of my abilities, and they've actually stepped in and said, instead of saying, well, if you're struggling, maybe you should go home, or maybe that's not an event for you. Instead of saying that, they said, what can we do to help you enjoy this or participate? the peers that I have been working with have, instead of saying, well, maybe this isn't for you, they said, what can I do to help this be easier for you? They stepped in with me when I'm struggling. And just being aware, there was one event where our parking lot was really a long distance over a very rough road from the camping. And I happened to notice an older lady coming along with her walker and having to stop lots. And I was coming from the parking lot, and it was such a long time that it took me, I mean, she had actually stopped a couple of times while I was still walking up to her. And so instead of just jumping in and making things happen for her, I asked, I said, is there something I can do to help? Are you just taking this to your car? She says, no, actually, I'm leaving for the day. I looked at her and I looked at the parking lot and I said, I have my license. Would it be okay if I took your keys and brought your car to you? She just about cried. So I went, got her car, brought it to her, and and helped her load up, and off she went for the day. That sort of awareness, checking in, watching people to see if someone's struggling, and then stepping in and asking how you can help, instead of just jumping in and doing for them. That's part of what I've been receiving.
For me, I think I have friends that like to show up early. So obviously I tag them first. They go to the event and they know what I need, what to look for. If I couldn't get a good communication between the site steward or whoever, they look for that spot in the aisle to make sure I get to in court. They look for a good spot to grab for a feast table, hopefully close to a restroom that I can get into. I think for me, a lot of it is not only communication, but being a common thing, for lack of a better word, something that everybody just knows you're going to be there. And you're something familiar that's going to be at an event. And the longer you do that, the less answers you have to give to people. And if it's kind of going in the right direction when things are just being done for you out of the kindness of people's heart, and you didn't have to say anything. You got to be perfectly normal, like everybody else, and just show up to an event. And you didn't have to feel like you were bothering anybody or you were putting anybody out or anything, and you were just another member. And I think in that aspect, you feel like you belong there. And that seems to be the best thing you can do, is just continue to go to events and to continue to have fun, no matter your own personal hurdles or no matter what negativity you run into. Just keep going at it. Thank you.
I have to say that although my physical challenges are so random that people never know what I'm going to need, and are very kind to ask on a regular basis, I think that the single thing that stands out to me is, due to something totally not related to the SCA, in December, my PTSD has surfaced with a vengeance. And that has made it impossible for me to drive anywhere without someone accompanying me, or at least knowing that I'm in a caravan. I can't do it. There have been countless people, starting with the canton, the barony I'm in, and friends from across. I feel I'm going to cry because it has just been so amazing, who have stepped in to help me feel safe, and who, before it was canceled, they were even going to drive like across the country to help me get to a large event that I could not have gone to otherwise. I was invited, but there was no way I was going to drive that way alone. That has been, I can't say how wonderful that has been, because believe me, my feeling of safety is no more. And everyone who is pitched in to give me that, just, I'm here to say thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you again, because I would no longer be in the SCA. I could not. Once it leaves the airwaves and goes back to real time, I don't think I could ever get to an SCA event again without this assistance. And thank you.
Puffin.
There we go. Sorry. So for me, I don't really want to talk about me. I'd like to talk about someone else who has a disability that was told that they should consider camping with Broken Shield at Penzic rather than the people that they love, because there just weren't enough accommodations and they just couldn't be bothered. And our camp literally said, no, that's ridiculous. And everybody in the camp came together and made sure that that person could get everywhere that they wanted to be. And for me, that is what I would like to see moving forward, is everybody who knows somebody who has a disability, figure out how you can help them have a better time in the SCA. That's it.
Thank you. So we're going to move on to answering the live questions, but I do want to say that we're not accepting any more because obviously we're almost 30 minutes over time. But we're going to go through answering the ones that we haven't already touched. How do we spread information about the many period handicapped accommodations?
So I don't know who wrote this question, but I would love to have you contact me because I want to know more of what you're asking about, because I teach about disability history. So I want to know if you know something I don't. I haven't seen a ton of accommodations in my research, especially if you were not wealthy. People that were aristocratic or had money or had status typically had a lot more advantages. If you were somebody that was poor, if you just worked on a farm, something like that, you may lose it all, really, if you became disabled and you couldn't work. So I haven't seen a ton of accommodations for what I would say is like the common folk, the typical people in the Middle Ages. There are some very interesting ones out there for people that had money to acquire them. But yeah, hit me up. I teach some classes on this topic, and I'd love to get into that more with you for sure.
So this next question sounded like a suggestion along the lines of our accommodations for court for neurodivergent members in the SCA, and I'm hoping Sadhbh can speak to it a little bit more. What about a stand-in for court? An assistant or a mentor could help with the larger courts for those that are not able to deal with the large public show of attention.
Absolutely. Now, it has always been my experience in our area where when someone is called to court and they've not been there or didn't step up, the next question is there anyone here that could accept this on their behalf? And like I said, when it came to my Gut de Sang, my Baron and Baroness accepted it for me. This would take, well, the people around you to know you and be, where you could talk to them about stepping in for you. Certainly peers and mentors who have taken people on to help them through the SCA could have that conversation with those people and say, when it comes to court, what is your preference? And this isn't just for neurodiverse people. As you said, shy, could have various reasons why they really don't want to be in that public light. And like I said, in my kingdom, we've generally asked when they didn't show up, is there someone here who can accept it on their behalf? So that is definitely a thing.
Thank you. The next question that we had submitted, I've encountered a reluctance of having excuse me, I apologize, one moment. I've encountered a reluctance of having this due to the thought of, quote, it would make the sites more expensive if they have to make sure sites are accommodating. Judith, would you mind answering or responding to this question?
Sure, thank you. Again, as I mentioned earlier, there's a difference between accessible and accommodation. So if you ensure that the event site and the way you set up tables and chairs and all of those other things is accessible, there really is no expense or difficulty in doing that. For instance, if you're setting up seating for courts and you leave a 36-inch wide aisle and a place for someone to pull in out of the aisle in their wheelchair only requires that you not put a chair in that spot. So that's less work. If nobody that uses a wheelchair comes to use that space, all you have to do is slip up a folded chair and go put it in that spot for someone else to be able to sit there. It's not costly or difficult to provide accessibility. We're not asking that you widen doorways or build ramps. Most SCA events are outside. How can you turn a field into an inaccessible space? The only way you can do that is by putting movable barriers in the way. The standard is 36 inches wide. If when you're setting up chairs or whatever, you have somebody walk through holding a yardstick across in front of them, you'll be able to tell. You don't have to go out with a tape measure and measure between each side of the aisle. Just grab a yardstick and walk through. And if you're bumping into something, that needs to be moved a little bit. And any other questions about? I mean, it's not hard. People make it harder than it needs to be. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm going to read a question that was submitted, and I don't know along the time frame of during our panel when this came on, but before I read it, I want to preface it with hopefully throughout our conversation that we've all learned, the audience has learned that not all disabilities are visible, right? There are invisible disabilities, and sometimes even what might be a visible disability may be invisible at a certain event, because even someone who has mobility issues may be functioning in a way that they might not have their walker or their wheelchair at that event because of their mobility at that specific time. Okay, so I when I read this question, I'm hoping that the person that wrote it remembers whenever they're making site accommodations that accommodations are important for invisible disabilities as well. And we've talked about those already. So I'm going to read the question that was submitted, but I did want to add that disclaimer at the top because I think that's really important for everybody that's here today and the audience that's watching too. So here's the question that we have that we're answering, and I'm going to ask Elisabeta to respond to it. We don't typically go up and ask people, quote, "Are you disabled?" And many people with disabilities don't show them as obviously as someone in a wheelchair might. True. There are resources on the DEI page or on the Kingdom pages that outline overall accommodations that can help a variety of disabilities when planning an event. Saying accommodate isn't enough if event stewards don't know how or what to accommodate. As someone with physical limitations, it's my responsibility to let people know what my specific needs are, not to assume that everyone understands my limitations. And that's all that I have as far as the question that was asked. But I'm hoping that Elisabeta, perhaps you want to speak about the classes that are available. I do want to mention also, and I'm going to talk about later, the class resources that we're going to have after the panel that people are going to be able to access. But can you respond to what I just read, please?
Yeah, so there's a couple things here to touch on. One is I absolutely understand that if you've never had to deal with accessibility problems, it's very easy to not understand what that means. And that is part of why I started teaching a class on accessibility. So I'm gonna put that out there as a great resource for anybody that wants to plan an event. I really encourage you to seek out resources like my class, which you can find on the eRUM channel, which is the Royal University of Mid-Realm. They're on YouTube. There's going to be a link to it in the resources. I have a 2-hour-long class just on ways to make an event more accessible. And I know that Zara, our DEI officer, also has some inclusivity classes. So there is definitely resources out there for ways to educate yourself and then in turn make your event more accessible. So I think I see where it says it's my responsibility to let people know what my specific needs are, not to assume. And I do agree with that to some extent, but I also feel like we have a bigger obligation to just make spaces more accessible. And I would encourage people to look up a concept called universal design. And that's a concept that I touch on in some of my classes that I teach. That basically talks about how when you create a space that's more welcoming for a specific group, you're really making a space more welcoming for the entire group, and how one leads to another, which leads to a bigger picture. So while I do agree that maybe you have a specific need that's kind of funky, I got some stuff that's kind of funky, and I got my own, things that I will always seek out answers to before I come to an event. But I think there's plenty of things that we can change as a whole that will help a ton of people without having to put the burden on them to make changes. So that's where I'm gonna go with that. And also, I also recommend, if you're planning an event, that one of your department heads be an accessibility person, so that you've got somebody that's actively thinking about these things, and you're going to work side by side with them as the event steward, but they're there to answer questions if people want to email somebody. If I go on a website and I see that you've got an accessibility person with an email right there, I automatically know you have been thinking about this, you are willing to listen, you're willing to take questions, and you've got a person that's ready to answer them. So that's another recommendation for ways that you can make tiny little changes that make a big difference to people.
And Elisabeta is one step ahead of me, because someone else submitted, I wonder if it will be a workable idea when we're training autocrats to have someone on their event team to be tasked with identifying accessibility and options for those who need accommodations. So it sounds like the panel is suggesting, or at least one person on the panel is suggesting, that that's already a great idea. So that's something that at least one person from the community is recommending as something that would help. And perhaps in conversation, when you're thinking about autocrating an event, you recommend, or your group recommends, looking over these panels, because we're having these conversations about accessibility. You've got people from communities talking about what makes things easier and how it helps us. And this is the first conversation, but it's not the last conversation. Even though this is a conversation about disabilities in the SCA, my plan is to have another panel about topic focuses in depth about specific communities for disabilities in the SCA, mobility issues in the SCA, neurodivergence in the SCA, so that we can learn more how to help specific communities within the disabled communities in the SCA, because it's important and everybody has certain needs, and there are ways that you can empower those communities and make the SCA more accessible for everyone. And I think that that's really important. It is really important. It's not, I think, I know it's really important. And it's a goal that I have, and it's a goal that the society should have. And that's how I feel about it. And so another Facebook comment that we got was, the East has an accessibility checklist, and the event calendar has a note beside of the site whether or not it's compliant or not. And it's a balance between cost, availability, and event staff being aware of what they need to plan for, and they're working to educate people on what is needed. I would love to see this accessibility checklist. If you would be willing to share that with me, that would be amazing. I think that other kingdoms, I don't know if they have something like that. If your kingdom has something like that and you're willing to send it to me, that would make me very happy. I would love to add it to the resources so that kingdoms can start communicating with each other on what they have, and we can start working together to try to, as a society, improve our site accessibility goals. And at least whenever someone has an accessibility need, they don't drive to a site only to find out that it's not accessible and then have to drive back home because the site wasn't accessible, which happens. So that's what we wanted to talk about today. And there was another question, comment, concern that came up about food allergies. And I think that might be outside of the scope of this particular panel, but if you would reach out to me personally, because I want to help link you with the person that I believe can help you with that. That's something that I want to assist you with, but I think it's outside of our scope today. So I want to acknowledge you and let you know you're not being ignored. It's just not something that I can do today. There's going to be a class resource list, and I'm asking all of the panelists to link the classes that they've taught, websites that they think might be helpful, recordings, empathy exercises that we can do to help increase our awareness about struggles and challenges and life experiences, and anything that can help educate us on how to help empower other people and their SCA experience and their life experiences. And if the panel would like to provide any kind of closing comments or statements, then I want to give them a chance to go around the room and do so. So I'm going to post an order of names so that they know a little bit about what order we're going in, and I'm gonna do that. And I just want to thank everybody for attending. I think that this has really been a monumental step in the right direction for the society, for the known world. Thank you for having us. Thank you for everything. I really appreciate it. And I'll say a little blurb at the end, but I'm going to ask Raven to speak if he doesn't mind, if he has anything to say, and then I'll talk a little bit more later if you'll listen to me for a few more minutes. So.
Just a few things. First, thank you for inviting me to speak on the panel, and it was good to know everybody that's on the panel today. I did bring up a gentleman that I to you privately before, and I think maybe he'd be a good panelist to have in the future. He's in a wheelchair and he still fights hard suit. He still shoots archery and he still fights rapier and he does everything in a wheelchair and he still gets around. In Atenveldt, we had someone who only had one leg and he was on the hard suit field running around killing people left and right. So there are people out there, and there is some historical illuminated manuscripts of people dealing with handicaps in the Middle Ages and how they did it. Two other people that I was thinking maybe you can get on here too is eventually, I don't know if it's still in place, but Ethelmark and the Kingdom of the East have a office called the Porter, and their job is to be an advocate for those with disabilities. And they work with sites and they're kind of the middle person. And I've been trying to get one of those in our kingdom too. So you have that one, they have one person that is general, works with that with each kingdom and each barony and stuff like that. Like I said, an advocate. And it's good to have something like that in every kingdom, and I hope that happens. That's all I had. Thank you.
I too want to say thank you for having me and giving me the opportunity to share my experiences and share what I have seen. I've always been a firm believer that if one person has a question or has a need, there's at least a dozen or two others that absolutely have the same question or the same needs. So getting it out there, having people realize that this actually is a little more normal, a little more common than you might otherwise realize. Sometimes it feels like we're isolated. There's more of us out there than you thought. So thank you very much. And I hope, as I said before, I firmly believe that there's no such thing as no. There's just find another way. And hopefully this starts to expand on finding those other ways.
I would love to thank you all for inviting me. First of all, Olivia, thank you. And secondly, that we're even having this conversation just makes me so hopeful. I no longer have to say, well, I went to that event because I wanted to annoy someone. I actually have hope that this will work out better than I'd even imagined. And thank you guys. Thank you all for letting me talk today. I don't know how to turn it off. Tap it. No, I don't want to leave.
I just, same pretty much as everyone else, you know, thank you for having these conversations. And that the start of making changes is understanding that we have a need for a change, right? So definitely thank you for getting this started and having voices be heard and having experiences be heard and validated. And I can't wait to see where we go from here, you know? So that's what I'm really excited about. So thank you guys.
I would just like to say that there are no perfect answers. It's about asking the questions and making the decisions. That's what matters. Don't ever feel like your idea isn't going to be good enough, because it's a start. And once you've made that start, maybe you'll find that you can improve upon it. It doesn't have to be perfect. Thank you.
Sorry, I have loved participating, and I really don't have any closing comments. Just reach out to the people you know um, who aren't normal, and don't think of it as not normal either. Your people with disabilities are just as normal. They want to have fun. They want to be with you. They want to hang out. Just let them have fun and include them as much as you can, and do your best, and we'll all figure it out.
Thank you. Thank you to my panelists, all of you, for being here. I love you all so much. Oh my gosh. Thank you to Fiona for doing the closed captioning for us today. Thank you for Zahra and Andreas for helping moderate. And thank you to everybody who watched live, and everybody who's going to watch this recording later to help us learn how to make the society more inclusive and help us accommodate the community, all of the communities, because we need you. We need you. And it's really important, and it means a lot. It means more than we can tell you. It really does. And the panel next month that I want to plan is going to be on the trans spectrum in the SCA. So if that's something that you're able to participate in, or you have someone in mind that might want to participate in, please reach out to me and let me know, because the planning is going to begin. This is not the last Disabilities in the SCA panel topic focus. We're going to talk about mobility and neurodivergence and other topics. So reach out to me if any of this is something that you'd like to speak on, you know someone you'd like to hear on the panel, or if there's another topic focus panel that you'd like me to do, please send me a private message and let me know, because we've got a lot of work to do, y'all. We've got a lot of work to do. We're just getting started. We're not done. Message me. I'm on a mission and I need your help. I can't do it by myself. Thank you. I love you. I love you, Atlantia. I love you, SCA. Thank you for everything. I'll see you soon. Take care. Stay safe.